There is a specific kind of person who cannot remember ever truly being a child. Not because their memory is bad, not because their childhood was uneventful, but because somewhere very early on, the rules that applied to children, that you were protected, that you were taken care of, that your only job is to grow at your own pace, those rules quietly stopped applying to them. They were 7 years old and already reading the mood of the house before they walked through the door. They were 10 and mediating arguments between the adults who were supposed to be mediating theirs. They were 12 and carrying information about finances, relationships, illnesses, and problems that no 12-year-old should be carrying. And they did it without being asked, because somewhere along the way, they understood that if they didn't, things would fall apart. The adults around them called it maturity. Teachers called it impressive. Relatives looked at them and said things like, "You're so grown up for your age," as if that were a compliment. It wasn't. What was actually happening had a name. Psychologists call it parentification. It was formally defined as the process by which a child is placed in the role of a parent or caregiver to their siblings, to their parents, sometimes to the entire emotional infrastructure of the family. The child becomes responsible not just for tasks that belong to adults, but for the emotional survival of the people who were supposed to be responsible for theirs. Researchers have identified two distinct forms of this. The first is instrumental parentification, taking on the physical labor of the household, cooking meals, paying bills, raising younger siblings, and managing the logistics of a home. The second is emotional parentification, and according to decades of clinical research, it is significantly more damaging. This is when the child becomes the parent's confidant, their therapist, their emotional stabilizer, the person the parent calls when they are falling apart, the person who learns to monitor a parent's emotional state so closely that they can predict a crisis before it arrives and quietly begin managing it before it becomes visible. Researcher Gregory Yurkovich, who spent his career studying parentified children, described it precisely. He said that emotional parentification is particularly insidious because it is often disguised as closeness. The parent says, "We have such a special bond, you understand me like no one else does." But what is actually happening is that a child is holding the emotional weight of an adult. That is not a bond, that is a recruitment. And the child doesn't know that. How could they? They only know that this is what love looks like in their house, that being needed is the same as being valued. That is the way to stay safe, be useful. So they learn. They learn to read a room before entering it. They learn to shrink their own needs because there is no space for those needs, and they already understand that instinctively. They learn that asking for something, comfort, attention, reassurance, creates a burden, and they stop asking. They learn that crying in front of the wrong person in the wrong moment makes things worse, so they learn to cry alone or not at all. They learn that being the stable one, the responsible one, the one who holds it together, is the identity that keeps everything from collapsing. And here's the part that stays with them long after childhood is over. They get very good at it. So good that by the time they are adults, they do not recognize it as a wound. They recognize it as a personality trait. They think this is just who they are, capable, self-sufficient, perceptive, always the one other people lean on. They do not connect it to anything that happened. They just feel, in a way that is hard to articulate, that they never really had a childhood, that there was always something they were responsible for, that rest, actual, guiltless, purposeless rest, has never felt entirely available to them. They move into adult relationships and the patterns follow them without announcement. They are drawn to people who need them because being needed is familiar, and familiarity feels like safety. They have an almost involuntary response to other people's distress. They move towards it. They want to fix it. They feel vaguely guilty if they don't. They find it genuinely difficult to ask for help, not because they are proud, but because at a deep level, they do not believe they are supposed to need any. Needing things was never part of the role they were given. They set boundaries and feel immediate guilt. They say no and spend 3 days wondering if they handled it correctly. They achieve things that should feel good and find themselves unable to simply enjoy them because somewhere underneath is the quiet sense that they are only as valuable as what they are currently providing to someone else. A study published in the Journal of Family Psychology found that adults who reported significant parentification during childhood were measurably more likely to struggle with relationship boundaries, self-worth, and what researchers described as an exaggerated sense of personal responsibility, a persistent feeling that other people's problems are theirs to solve. What is important to understand is that parentification does not require a cruel parent. It does not require a home that looks obviously broken from the outside. Some of the most parentified children came from homes that appeared functional. A parent who was emotionally fragile but present. A parent who was going through something genuinely hard leaned on the child because the child was the most emotionally intelligent person in the room. A parent who loved their child completely and still, without realizing it, gave them a weight they were never designed to carry. The child in that situation does not grow up thinking they were harmed. They grow up thinking they were helpful. They grow up proud of how capable they are. And it is not until much later, sometimes in their 30s, sometimes older, that something cracks open and they realize they are exhausted in a way that sleep does not fix. That they have been performing competence for so long, they are not sure what they actually feel underneath it. That they cannot locate what they want, because for most of their lives, the relevant question was never, "What do you want?" It was, "What does everyone else need right now?" That is the moment the grief arrives. And it is a specific kind of grief, not for something that was lost in a single event, but for something that was quietly taken, piece by piece, in the ordinary moments of growing up. The grief of realizing that no one was really watching out for you the way you were watching out for everyone else. The grief of the childhood that existed in pieces, fragments of play and lightness between the responsibilities, but never fully, never without the weight of awareness that you were also the person keeping things together. There is no clean way to resolve that. Therapists who work with adults who experienced parentification describe the process as reparenting, learning, often very slowly and with significant resistance, to learn to extend to yourself the care you spent your childhood giving to everyone else, learning that your needs are not a burden you are imposing on people, learning that asking for help is not the same as failing at being the person who doesn't need any. Learning at the most basic level that you were a child once, and that what happened to you was not maturity, it was an adaptation. The difference matters, because maturity is something that develops naturally at its own pace, supported by people who hold the weight so you don't have to. Adaptation is what a child does when the weight arrives before they are ready, and there is no one else to carry it. You were never too mature for your age. You were a child who figured out how to survive in a house that needed more from you than it should have. And that is not something to be proud of in the way you were taught to be proud of it. It is something to be understood. And eventually, with enough time and enough honesty, something to be set down.